Welcome, everybody, to the SNN Network Summer Virtual Event. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and I'd like to introduce our next panel here today at our event. This panel is titled Cyber Breaches. Don't be the next high-profile victim. This panel is sponsored by CyZen, and today moderating this panel will be Will Mendez. He's the Managing Director at CyZen. And with that, Will, take it away.
Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. As Bob mentioned, my name is Will Mendez. I'm the Managing Director of Operations for CyZen, a cybersecurity organization company that we help clients, meet their cybersecurity needs. But today I'm here with a panel of industry experts from various aspects of elements of cybersecurity. We have Michael Schenck, who is a senior consultant for CyZen, and he helps organizations determine where to start with cybersecurity, what they need to do when it comes to cybersecurity. We also have Mike Tomasulo, who's here representing the insurance industry, and I'm sure many of you have probably felt the effects of the recent headlines when it comes to cyber insurance. So Mike will help us understand what those effects look like. We also have Johnny Dolan, who is a Security Operations Center analyst within CyZen. So he sees a lot of the activity that's happening out there for our clients, and he helps mitigate a lot of those activities and respond accordingly to whatever's happening. So again, thank you for joining us for this this panel discussion. So this is going to be an informal conversation among all of us here to kind of help you navigate the challenges associated with cybersecurity, helping you not to become, the next high-profile victim, as the headlines seem to indicate. So, we'll be able to hopefully answer many of your questions and shed some light as to what you need to do when it comes to protecting yourself from cybersecurity. So having said that, we've all seen the headlines. We all know what's happening out there. They've, as the CISA, former CISA director mentioned, they went for our gasoline, they went for our hot dogs. That means everybody is really a target. And it's pretty scary what's happening out there. And, we want to try to shed some light as to what actually is happening, who's attacking, and what we can do to kind of help ourselves. So, when it comes to what's happening, Michael, what is your insight into, perhaps what's happening out there, why the sudden or the appearance of a sudden increase in cyber attacks?
Thanks, Will, for the introduction. Yeah, everything we're seeing in the cybersecurity landscape and all these news stories, it's the very things that we've been kind of predicting and hearing that was going to happen over the last 5-6 years. We've just been seeing, especially with the ransomware attacks, it just becomes more and more amplified. Some of it could be attributed to a lot of the work from home because the global pandemic and this diversified, that it's no longer a single workplace where we see posters around the office saying about cybersecurity awareness. So that could certainly play a part of it. But it really is following a lot of the same trends that CISA, the FBI, NIST, and all these other organizations have been predicting all along.
Thank you, Michael. And Mike, given what's happening, and it's going to be the similar question to you. I mean, what changes, has it affected the insurance industry given the recent headlines?
Yeah, thanks, Will. For sure. I mean, we did see, the big exposure going back a year or two ago was all the social engineering, the phishing and social engineering, people wiring money. We saw cases where CFOs were wiring millions of dollars out to fake accounts because someone hacked the CEO's, personal email and sent a wire request. And that was, the predominant amount of claims we were seeing in the insurance industry on the cyber side, going back 12, 24 months ago. But it seems like companies have gotten better with that, right? They're doing phishing exercises, they're testing, they seem to be doing better education with these emails, checking emails. So, but, as Michael had mentioned, we saw a huge uptick, with the pandemic coming in March of last year, all the work from home, all the MFA issues, the multi authentication factoring. Companies were not prepared, right? It was like the light switch turned and everyone was working from home, and maybe they didn't have a VPN set up or they didn't have proper backups. And that's, I think, when we saw the ransomware attacks just explode. And we have seen carriers starting to cut their limits, increase the deductibles on ransomware attacks. We've seen increases in premiums on an annual basis now between 50 and 100% rate increases on cyber insurance. We've seen it become difficult to place large cyber deals on companies that maybe have that exposure. Maybe they do have a lot of personal identifiable information, or they're in a certain industry segment where they're privy to that. Maybe it's healthcare related where they have HIPAA issues potentially. And so we've absolutely seen the marketplace respond, right? The insurance market responds to claims and to headlines. And so we've certainly seen that become more difficult. It used to be so much easier to get cyber. It was much cheaper. The limits and the retentions were a lot more reasonable. But we're certainly seeing the insurance market respond to the recent wave of cyber attacks.
Thank you, Mike. Johnny, you're kind of like right there in the battlefield. You're in the trenches. You're seeing the activity associated with a lot of what's happening in the headlines. Can you kind of tell us a little bit of have you seen any changes in activity, maybe in how clients are reacting to the headlines, specifically your clients when you talk to them, within the monitoring space?
Yeah, I think most definitely. I think that's, when it comes to ransomware in particular, it's always the very forefront of people's minds, just because I suppose the media coverage it gets, and a lot of people see that as the worst case scenario for a business when it comes to being attacked by the cybersphere. I think there is a greater, what I've seen anyway, in terms of protections being put in place, I think there's a greater respect now put on, the initial vectors of attack, like your email compromise and that kind of thing. Companies know that, they're only as strong as their weakest point, and that weakest point being, a lot of that stuff through the email. A lot of the traffic, as we know, for these ransomware attacks, starts there and then works through, I suppose, vulnerable users in that regard. So I think there's been a greater emphasis, I find anyway, on security awareness training, especially for a lot of users. With email and with phishing awareness, I think has been a key factor to that. And in my experience, I think in a previous workplace I was in, the phishing simulation game, really took off. And within 1 year, I think, we were at fish prone was like a 40% type thing, and we managed to get that down to 10%. So it's like, as we know in this game, we can never eradicate the risk. We can only minimize it as best we can. So I think, companies are definitely changing their tune on that, and they're really respecting the fact that, if we can just nail down that initial point of attack, then, you go a long way to protecting yourself, in the future.
Thank you, Johnny. So we've kind of identified what are the changes, what is the reaction to a lot of the headlines that are happening out there. So we know we're being attacked. We definitely know that anyone is a target, but do we have any idea who's actually creating or who's actually performing these attacks, who's perpetrating these attacks? Michael, from your perspective and just from your knowledge, who do you think that the main threat actors that are creating these headlines, who are they?
That's a very good question. A lot of it, especially with these larger attacks, Microsoft, FireEye, and the US government has come out and pointed fingers at Russian, both state-sponsored and or maybe state-funded cybersecurity, attack gangs, hacker gangs. And that's where a lot of it kind of starts from what I've seen. But these ransomware gangs especially are kind of doing attacks as a service, cybercrime as a service, where they are providing tools for a fee or either a flat rate fee or like a consignment fee to then pepper out attacks against either a targeted company or just in general. And because we're all targets, it's not like the old thinking, from 5, 10, 15 years ago, where it's like, oh, no one's I'm a small business, there's no value in attacking me. But now, because of these ransomware gangs and there's ransomware as a service or the cybercrime as a service, we're seeing a lot more. The cost of performing the attack is down, so the small cap target now becomes more valuable, because if it only costs them $5, for example, to launch a ransomware attack against a person, and then that ransom is $1,000 or $10,000 or upwards of 100 or even over 1 million, all of a sudden that cost versus reward has made it a lot easier to attack the small business, especially because a lot of them are carrying cyber insurance now, and without proper recovery capabilities, a lot of them rely on the cyber insurance to pay the ransom and not interfere with business.
Thank you, Michael. So Mike, from the insurance industry's perspective, I mean, what are you seeing as far as the threat actors that are out there, maybe based on claims? Do you have any insight into that? And then also, is insurance actually paying the ransom, as kind of Mike mentioned before?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've gotten to the point where, a couple of years ago, you would measure ransom attacks by how many per day, right? And now we're into how many per second, right? I think the last statistic I read said there's a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. So it's no longer just about the big headline, ransomware attacks. I think I read somewhere like, maybe 50% of actually ransomware attacks are being reported. There's a lot that are being unreported. I believe the latest statistic I saw from the insurance community was 75% of these attacks are being made against companies with less than $50 million in revenue, right? So these are not big companies. And while maybe the average ransom demand is, between $175, I think, and $200,000, and an insurance policy could pay that, we're seeing that the average cost of all-in of an attack is somewhere around, $1.8, $1.9 million. Because you've got not just the ransomware attack, then you've got the forensic, the cyber forensics that go into figuring out how they got in and patching it. Then you've got the downtime, loss of income, potentially loss of reputation, depending on what they do. I mean, it becomes, a snowball effect. And as far as I think, to Michael's point, I think we're seeing most of what we know, the attacks coming from either Russia, Iran, China, North Korea seem to be the actors, where the U.S. is one of the top targets of all these countries. And it's gotten to the point where, it's not about, well, I'm not an internet company, I don't have access. I'll tell you a story. I have a client of mine that used to be a client of mine. They were a small, about a $20 million revenue, basically a mom and pop manufacturing company. And we had done their renewals, and we pitched them the idea of, hey, it's only about a year ago now, a year and a half ago, you should buy a cyber policy. I mean, it's important, it's $1 million coverage. It covers everything, ransomware attacks, social engineering claims, and it's gonna be about $1,200 a year. And they said, no, absolutely not. We don't need this. We only have 2 employees and the entire company have email. Nothing's online. None of our systems are online. None of our computers are online. None of our manufacturing equipment's online. We just, it's not important to us. We're not spending the money. Okay. No lie, 3 months later, they call me. Hey, we just got, did we buy that insurance from you guys? No. Well, we got in this morning and we had an attack. All our systems were locked out. We had been ransomware attack. Can't get into our system. We have to pay a ransom now. And all in, it wound up costing them about $250,000 between the ransom and the remediation and the forensics. They could have satisfied that, 100% of that loss most likely would be covered by insurance. And I think the latest statistic I saw said that about 94% of these attacks are paid for by insurance when they have the insurance. So it definitely should be part of your prevention plan, right? It should be part of your plan is to have some amount of coverage in place. And while it is getting expensive, I mean, we just worked on, for the purposes of the call we're on and those that are listening into this, a small microcap public company in the technology space, $50 million market cap company, a couple million in revenue. We were able to get them a $1 million policy for $950. That's just, it's silly not to spend that low of a cost for the protection you're getting.
No, thank you, Mike. Thank you for that. So obviously we see the importance of cyber insurance, and Mike alluded to that it should also be part of your prevention. And we're going to talk a little bit later on in the cast here as far as what we need to do to protect ourselves and how we need to start thinking about security. But one question to Johnny, as far as attacks, as far as techniques, what you're seeing out there as to what it is that these threat actors are doing to gain access to organizations. I mean, what can you tell us about what you're seeing there in the trenches?
Yeah, so as I said before, it's like the initial vector always seems to go through the human element, because as we know, it's 95% of these breaches are human error. So they're going to target these users, and even the attacks as big as the Twitter compromise, that was an insider kind of job that someone was manipulated, right? So it's like there has to be that one little in. Obviously you're going to get vulnerabilities here and there, but most often than not, these attackers are just going to go to the people that are just not I suppose tech-minded, or tech security minded at the very least. So what we're seeing is, these attackers are very much up to date with the security measures that are put in place by your email filtering and all that, and your endpoint detection. So what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and stay under the radar as much as possible. Social engineering aspect of that is charm someone up through email, try and work their way in with some sort of conversation, and then be able to gain the trust of that person as if, hey, I'm a vendor, hey, I'm a friend of yours, that kind of thing. And before you know it, one thing leads to another. They say, hey, download this Excel macro, the thing gets enabled, code injection, and then we've got some enumeration going on. A most recent case, I dealt on was that exact type of vector. It was, just a simple Excel sheet. The attackers got in by that. They enabled a macro on the Excel sheet. From there was ladder movement, and it's kind of lights out after that. Once they get in, there's a lot of ladder movement to like your critical servers. And then, your data exfiltration starts. And from that point, when you see, the data exfiltration, more often than not, the ransomware follows. Once they get what they need out of you, then they extort you. So yeah, it's I suppose the tale is always time. You just kind of target the weakest link, and you kind of work from there. And if the security measures are in place and your partitioning isn't up to date, yeah, you're gonna have a bad time.
Thanks, Johnny. So we've kind of mentioned, obviously, what the threats are, what the potential impact, as Mike mentioned. There's a lot of hidden costs, especially when it comes to ransomware, that it's not just paying the ransom. There's the investigation, and there's other costs associated with recovering from that type of incident. So Michael, so when it comes to security, how do we start looking at protecting ourselves? What can we do to at least initiate that action of being able to not become that headline when it comes to a cyber incident or a breach?
Thanks, Will. There's a lot of things that can be done, it's one of the biggest things is historically there's been so much focus on prevention, making sure you have your firewalls in place, and making sure strong passwords, you've got your antivirus updated and ready to go and running at all times to try to catch these things. But that's a good solid strategy, is to prevent the attack. Best way of not getting sick these days is to get a vaccine and wear a mask. So that's the same. So your antivirus and your firewall is basically your mask and vaccine for your computer. It helps identify and protect and react when something that has that malicious code becomes present on your computer. The antivirus says, "Hey, no." A firewall says, "Hey, no, I don't want you to be going out to talk to this Russian command and control website. We're going to stop that." And then allow your IT and security teams to sit there and clean up before you have a real mess. However, as you've seen, this isn't enough because breaches still happen. One of the biggest differences we've seen in technology-wise is the difference between your traditional, signature-based antivirus versus your next generation like endpoint network detection solutions that pick up on that lateral movement, watch more for the behavior of malware as opposed to looking for specific snippets of code. So really, to summarize, the answer is we have to look beyond prevention and start looking at detection, and then also to help drive those costs of a breach down, make sure we have an adequate way to respond and recover. If you want me to sit there and recite the 5 major categories of under the NIST cybersecurity framework of how to manage cybersecurity, it's not just prevention and reaction, it's detection, response, and recovery.
Yeah, no, well, good point, Michael. And I agree. I mean, we really need to start looking at security as a layered process, as that defense in depth. I mean, my background has been DoD in the military, and you're always taught that mantra of a defense in depth strategy. So you want to put obstacles in front of the enemy. You want to slow down their advance. Ideally, you want to stop their advance, but you also have to acknowledge that a very determined enemy is going to eventually get through with enough resources and available. So, and cyber is no different. So a very determined attacker is going to get through despite what the defenses you have. So we have to start thinking about it as a layered approach. And the beauty about it is that when you think of it as a layered approach, you can start applying controls, process, procedures, whatever you need to be able to help mitigate a cyber attack at each of those layers. And then you can also then prioritize, okay, maybe I don't need $25,000 firewall and the prevention aspect of it because I want to spend that maybe at another tool in one of the other layers. So if we think of the layers, as Michael alluded to, you have your prevention, which most of us do tend to spend a lot of time, and rightfully so, on prevention, but we have to acknowledge that stuff is going to get through. So, I mean, other layers can include detection, response, and recovery. So, excuse me, Michael alluded to NIST. So if those steps kind of sound familiar, it's because NIST has been preaching these layers of a risk-informed strategy for managing cybersecurity, for a while now. So for them, it's more of identification and protection, and that kind of can equate to prevention, and then everything else follows response and recovery along their model. So when you look at security at within a layered approach, Mike, where do you see kind of security? Where do you see insurance fitting into these layers? Whether it's prevention, detection, response, and recovery.
Yeah. So thanks, Will. Yeah, it's funny, when you talk about the insurance community and what they're doing or the response to ransomware attacks. I mean, one of the largest ransomware attacks we've seen to date was against an insurance company who's one of the largest providers of cyber insurance, right? I mean, that's CNA paid $40 million because they were locked out of their systems for almost 3 weeks, and they had no choice. And they offer tools and they sell the insurance and they know the risk, and it still happened, right? So I don't know what the preventions were behind the scenes. I think it was part of them getting in through email because they didn't have enough VPN protocols and security set up. So I think, it used to be that insurance was enough. Like insurance was almost your risk management, your prevention tool. Well, if I get hacked or I get a ransomware attack, I have insurance. So and a lot of insurance companies are really good with that. Like they do provide tools. A lot of insurance carriers are providing some good tools and testing and penetration testing, because look, end of the day, they want their clients to be a really secure company, right? So they're offering tools as part of the policies, which is great. But now it's changed, because now they want to see things ahead of time before you even buy the insurance. They want to make sure you're doing certain things to make yourself a better company before they insure you, or insure you with a decent price or decent premium. Some of the things that Michael alluded to, and I'm sure Johnny will discuss. But carriers are looking for those same things. They're looking for just a strong overall, IT structure, capabilities, responses. They're looking for regular deployment of patches. They're looking for some sort of multi-factor authentication and desktop protocols. They want to make sure that you secure any open ports, that you have good endpoint security at the workstation. They know that the company has thought about what it would look like, a disaster recovery plan. And these are the questions they're asking on our calls. We're having to do calls for the first time. Usually we just went out and secured coverage with carriers. A year ago, you get an application, you send it out, you get a great quote, and there you go. Now the carrier is saying, no, we want to talk to the IT professional. We want to ask them about their discovery. We want their disaster recovery. We want to ask them about what kind of phishing security awareness training they have internally, and how often they're testing, and how often they have a white hat going in and trying to trip up employees. So that's all become part of it. Like the insurance piece alone is requiring certain things be put in place just to insure you now. So that used to be the front end, right? It used to be like, all right, that's your solution. Now the insurance company is saying, no, you do this first. Make sure you have these protocols, these type of protections built in, because, to Michael's point and to your point, it can still happen, right? We know, there was a survey done with 5,400 IT professionals, and I think 37, almost 40% of them said, yeah, we've been attacked. Over half were successful, right? So even with the best protocols, the best procedures, the best plans, it can happen. And so the insurance company is trying to create that funnel, right? It's not just, hey, the funnel's not going this way. We buy insurance, we're going to pay everything. Now it's going like this. So make a better company. We'll pay the ones that get through, but we want you to do some due diligence on the front end. And so I think that's what, that's kind of what we're seeing in the insurance community. I think it's also important to remember that just because you pay the ransom, it's not 100% recovery rate, right? It's still only about 65% of these companies actually get their data back. So there's a real cost to not having to, to not making it as difficult as possible for a hack to be successful. And that's kind of where the insurance and the brokers are trying to help educate companies to use services like yours and to be a better company. One, because it's going to lower your rates, so you're going to save on insurance, and maybe that just the lower cost will pay for those programs to begin with. Not to mention eliminating a certain hack from being successful, and all the potential millions of dollars that you're saving from just above and beyond just the ransom payment itself.
Yeah, definitely, Mike. Those are good points, and I want to kind of follow up as you mentioned with the recovery. You're not guaranteed, even when you pay the ransom, that it's not 100% recovery, because we have to realize you're still dealing with criminals, you're dealing with thieves, and while it may be in their best interest that you get it, because if it is a business model, like Mike mentioned, it's not 100% guaranteed. But you also have to think about it. It's also not 100% guaranteed that this won't happen again. So they can give you the decryption key, you can get your systems back, but if you don't do anything, if you don't do a lessons learned and try to figure out, okay, how did they get in? What can I do to prevent this from happening again? Then you're going to be in the same situation, and you're going to wind up paying potentially a bigger ransom. And it may not necessarily be the same group. It might just be another group because they sold their access to or how they got in to another threat actor. So you have to realize who you're dealing with, especially when you make these informed decisions. And again, this should all be part of that layered security process. So, I mean, we talk about the layers, but a lot of times, for smaller organizations, it's like, okay, yeah, these are the layers, where do I start? Who do I turn to? And Mike, you alluded to, you can definitely turn to a third-party provider like us. There's also other resources out there, just depending what industry you're in. If you're a nonprofit, if you're education, the government does offer some resources for you to educate yourself. But again, that's a knowledge dump. There's no service. So if you have the knowledge, what do you do with that knowledge and how do you implement it properly? I mean, there's a lot of technology out there that can help us protect ourselves and can fit into these layers, but how do we decide which ones to use, which are the best ones? So, I'm going to, Johnny, I'm going to just ask you, as far as from an endpoint detection, because we are talking about ransomware, and professionally, I think that endpoint detection is actually crucial, because ransomware is attacking your endpoint. It is malicious software. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the technology used to detect this, and what we should be looking for if we're trying to stop a threat like ransomware?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the technology in itself, with today's advancements, and the use of AI and machine learning, it makes these things all the more easier to be detected, and in rapid time too. The problem is detection isn't enough. And, these things are only put in place by the policies that are put in place by the end users or security teams or IT teams in some instances. A lot of the times they're set up with, it's there, I have it logged in, we've all our agents spread out, we're protected. That's not the case. Just because it's there doesn't mean that it's active day to day or every minute of the day. It might just be on a detection kind of policy that would alert you, and then before you know it, you come back to it, and you've got about 100 alerts for ransomware across multiple different endpoints. So the fine tuning of it is kind of the crucial aspect. But to first venture into the I suppose the automation game of it all, right? I think I read somewhere that I think the security AI and automation controls actually reduce data breaches by about 82%. So that they're absolutely crucial in detecting these things, because to have I suppose just an end user or IT team or security team to try and think of all the different detections, signatures, all this correlation rules, that are being used, and keep up with the trends, it's quite impossible. So to have that AI and that real threat intelligence that's out there, that's crucial for detecting it in very quick time. And time really, from the analyst perspective, is in terms of ransomware, is crucial, because the sooner you catch it straight away, and the sooner you're able to mitigate that, you limit the spread as quick as possible. And we know ransomware, once it starts spreading, once it gets to critical servers and what have you, then you're in a very bad place. So the timing of it is definitely crucial. So from our perspective, when you're dealing with I suppose dynamic malware analysis and just AI engines, zero tolerance policy is, of course, the best way to go about it. Working with people, and different, users from different departments, you'll catch flack for people saying, why are you blocking this, or why are you blocking that? But you're better to be safe than sorry in these instances, and be able to block things that are in any way suspicious. You can't take that chance. It's much easier to block, a harmless document that's going to cause someone 5 minutes of inconvenience, rather than getting lamped with 4 million of a ransomware demand. So in that regard, it's much easier to kind of take that approach and get ahead of this as soon as possible with that zero trust policy, and leveraging that AI is crucial, but using it in the right way is all the more important than just having it. You have to be able to work with it. You have to have the right people to be able to work with it, and do that in a way that doesn't affect productivity in the business too. I think to tie all that together to make a really effective model there.
Thanks, Johnny. And Mike, I'll go back to you. So obviously you mentioned the funnel, and organizations, hopefully they can get a better rate, or the fact that they have a more robust security process, or maybe technology in place, can affect their insurance policy. I mean, how does the the insurance industry measure that? I mean, are all technologies equal? Are they taking into consideration, similar to what Johnny mentioned, like for endpoint security, you do want to make sure that you have some type of AI type of technology to be able to address, all of this, the malware, especially the sophisticated malware that's out there.
Yeah, so I mean, how the carriers determine this, one is, I would say at this point, the applications for cyber insurance have become some of the more complicated applications that are out there. I mean, typically we're dealing with potentially the CFO, controller, someone in the finance group, and they get this application that can be 15, 20 pages sometimes with all sorts of additional addendums, and their eyes glaze over. So it's become critical that the IT, the CTO or someone who's running their IT department, whether it's internal or external, has to get involved in the application process because of all the detailed questions that the carriers are asking. And then for larger risks, that where maybe some of the question and answers aren't as cut and dry, we're hosting calls. So we're getting the companies and their IT professionals on the line with the cyber underwriters from the carriers to answer questions and to walk through, how they're dealing with, securing endpoints, how they're dealing with, MFA protocols and how they're dealing with remote employees and, what their tools are. Who are they using? Are they using a third-party vendor to come in and address this? Are they not? Are they doing it all in-house? So certainly they're going through a very, very detailed application process in order to kind of determine what their, the risk factor is. Clearly, they're looking a lot harder for companies that are in the business of either, selling online, commerce sites that have the ability to let people buy on their site. That's a high level. As I mentioned before, a little bit earlier, healthcare companies, any company that's dealing with healthcare records, that's also pretty volatile. Financial companies that have potential social security numbers, or, so they do rank companies that are dealing with a lot of PII a little higher. Now, that doesn't mean they're more of a ransomware attack, but that's from the general cybersecurity hacking, those are very valuable records. So when you get a ransomware attack on a company that has 30,000 health records, that becomes a bit of a little bit more of a concern for that company than, a company that's, maybe doing something else like manufacturing widgets, right? So those are kind of things that the insurance community is looking at and how they're kind of, assessing the risk for various companies.
Thank you, Mike. Michael, Mike kind of mentioned some of the points that, what seems to make which industries are at risk. So can you kind of elaborate into what are the cyber risks that a company has, what makes them a target? Obviously, we know it's a PII information, but are there other factors that can make an organization a target of a cyber breach?
Certainly, as Mike was kind of alluding to, is like depends on what industry the company's in. He particularly called out medical records. Those are like the keys to the kingdom as far as identity theft is concerned, or even to then leverage a more targeted attack against a particular person or company. Is you have all this information. Birth dates, social security numbers are often there, address history, all that can be contained in your health records. So certainly that would be a big risk is first of all, like take a look at your company. What kind of information do you have? What's the value of that information to someone who wants to use it for legitimate or nefarious purposes? Because we can see things in the scope of like proprietary information, stealing information about trying to lowball a budget like a contract somewhere. There could be that kind of criminal element saying, oh, I need to beat this other company on this proposal we're both trying to win, so I'm going to try to hack into them, steal their inside information, and undercut them in the proposal process. Just that kind of, I mean, that's more of like that level of espionage tends to be more on government level and government contracts. as as well, that we both have a lot of experience in that public and public supplier sector with the defense and aerospace industry. So that could really be like the risks really are what kind of information you have and understanding like how to quantify the value of that information to somebody else, be it proprietary, patent information, things like that, to a medical record. It's really that would be the risk as far as from the outsider is concerned. But another big driver of risk for companies is the regulator. Going back to HIPAA, HIPAA has some really, really expensive teeth. If a medical provider is hacked and they did not do due diligence enough to protect themselves reasonably, then that could be a huge expense. So that's the other angles of risks that we see, especially working for a cybersecurity provider. We see that tends to be the bigger driver for a lot of companies, is not so much being afraid of it being attacked. It's it's those unquantified costs of public relations, regulatory fees, because PCI and HIPAA being the two most widely spread throughout the U.S. has some really, really expensive teeth to it that, throwing it over to Mike, insurance companies, if you're not doing the due diligence, don't want to pay.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you, Michael. And obviously, when you're looking at becoming, why are you a target? Obviously, Mike and Michael, both of you mentioned, there's the information, there's also monetary compensation, but we also have to think about that, because the common question that a lot of, especially small organizations, would say, well, I don't really have any personal information. I don't have any sensitive information. Why would they want to attack me? And the answer that I usually give is that, well, there's two ways that you become a victim, right? One, you're actually targeted, and two, you become a target of opportunity, meaning that if a threat actor is out there kind of just shooting out malware, ransomware, just to see what they get, if your security posture is not where it needs to be, then you're going to be caught in that net that they cast, and you're going to be a cyber victim. And it's in that case, the motivation is just money, and the fact that your security posture is not where it needed to be, so they were able to gain access and make you a victim of, let's say, ransomware. So a lot of times we have to think, obviously, like Michael mentioned, what information, what assets we have, but also let's think of the services that we also offer, because if a ransomware attack does hit you, you may not have sensitive information, but there might be a service that's critical to your business that gets affected by ransomware, in which case you're going to wind up, more likely, if there's no backups or there's no way of getting that service back up, you're going to wind up paying the ransom, and in which case they've kind of met their goal, which is monetary and financial, which is what they're looking for. So we need to look at that.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I did also want to add one more thing, is also looking at your business. While we're looking at business, not just the information you have, who are your customers, and are you a vendor to a third party? That might be a big target, because that's the big thing from the 2021 news cycle has been supply chain, and these third party tools. Going back to like SolarWinds back in December, or the ongoing issues we've seen with Microsoft with the print services, or Microsoft Exchange, have all been, or more recently the remote management and control tools used by your IT service providers are big targets. So that's the sort of things you also need to look at regarding what your business does.
Yeah, I would also add, it's about opportunity. I mean, for everyone that's dialing in and listening to this webinar, it doesn't matter if you think you're risky or not. I mean, you think about a car thief walking down the street, right? And on one side, he sees a brand new Lamborghini, but it's guarded by 3 armed guards. And on the other side of the street, there's an Audi sitting there with the keys in the engine running and the door open. Well, which one's he stealing? Yeah, the Lamborghini is more valuable, but the Audi's made itself so easy to steal, then they take the low-hanging fruit. And so I think the idea with this is don't be the low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, and I think I'd be remiss because we're dealing with public companies if I didn't mention, I know some of this of what's been said by Michael and maybe Johnny and Will can maybe over your heads, right? You're hearing things, your MFA and open-end security and endpoints and I do this on a daily basis and I'm still, some of this is over my head. But you are a publicly traded officer or director. You need to be discussing this at the board level. You need to understand what you're doing. You need to understand your plan. You have a fiduciary responsibility. You can be held personally liable. If your company gets a $40 million cyber ransomware attack and your stock drops, you're being sued. You're going to get sued by your shareholders. So understand what your plan is, understand what your company is doing about it. At least if you're not going to buy the insurance, at least get a quote. At least having the board minutes, you looked it over. Get a quote from a CyZen and a third-party assessment and what it would cost to have them come in. Do the homework. Make sure you can document your board minutes. And hey, we talked to the XYZ company. We talked to a third-party provider. We talked to an insurance broker, got quotes. Okay, maybe end of the day, you decided as a board it was too expensive right now. Okay, not the best choice, but at least you documented it. It's in your board notes. You thought about it. You made a thoughtful decision. Don't just ignore it. Don't just bury your head in the sand. You've got to be discussing this at the board level. You've got to be documenting your board minutes that this was a priority. This was on the agenda and this was discussed.
Yeah, and without kind of jumping too much into this, the scary news that we're trying to warn everybody about, but the most recent IBM Ponemon Institute, the cost of data breach report in 2021, it says your organization is 1/3 more likely to experience a breach within 2 years than it was 7 years ago. And that they're just not good odds. So I would tap into what Mike is saying there. It's like this should be discussed. At the very least, at least solidify these low-hanging fruits. And just make it that little bit trickier because the cost alone it's just not worth thinking about. And I think I saw another small factual piece of information there was the average cost of a data breach without automation tools now stands at $6.5 million. So more scary facts, but has to be said too.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it can be scary, but it's really about awareness. You need to be aware of these things, and as Mike alluded to and mentioned, is that awareness has to go all the way to the top, because if you get that buy-in from the leadership, then everything else hopefully will flow into place. And that usually is a sign of a good strong security program, is when you get that buy-in from senior leadership, because then hopefully you can get the resources and you can start implementing what needs to be done to make sure that you're not a victim of a cyber breach. So that awareness is crucial. And also, if you notice, the theme here is, excuse me, this isn't really a simple task, right? So a lot of it, as Mike mentioned, most of us in the industry do get tied down to terms, and we have to realize that a lot of times folks don't understand those terms. So, as you're going through this process, do not be afraid to ask of whoever, either your IT folks, even, whoever you're talking to, that you don't understand what they're saying, because you have to claim that you have to get that clear understanding. You have to get that explanation. So that way you're aware of what the true risk is, what the true threat is, and that way you can also make sure that you implement what needs to be done. And the same goes for insurance, I would imagine, Mike. So if I needed, like you mentioned earlier, that it can be complicated, are there resources out there? Who should we talk to when we're trying to decide, okay, how much cyber insurance we should get? What's the accurate, what's the appropriate, insurance and the coverages and things like that?
Sure. I mean, that's what we're here for. That's what we do as a broker. It'd be great if you use us as your broker. I do represent AHT Insurance, but a broker can then take your application, take your risk, take what you do, and then get it out to 15, 20 different insurance carriers. Right. That's what they're going to do. They're going to shop it, make sure it's the most competitive. They're going to analyze terms, conditions, get you on a call with carriers if needed. So that's really our job as a broker. it's very difficult for a company. It's almost impossible for a company to go direct to an insurance company and just get the insurance. They need to work through an intermediary that's licensed that can help navigate the process for them. So that's, that's what we're here for. And, I know we're coming up on short time. And I think for me, one of the most beneficial things, and I think we may talk about this, and maybe this will be the next question is, how do you respond? What do you do if you get a cyber attack, right? And I think that's, for me, especially for the folks that are probably dialing for this webinar is, what do we do if we get attacked? Like if we walk in one day on 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and we've got a message on our screen says all our data has been encrypted and we got to pay, 50,000 Bitcoin, what do we do? I think that's probably one of the most valuable things about an insurance policy. I mean, for a couple $1,000s a year, you have a 24/7 hotline that second that happens, you pick up the phone, you dial the number, you tell the insurance carrier, hey, I just been, hacked, I have a ransomware, and they take over, right? They send out a crisis response team. I mean, that's rather than trying to figure it out at that point and who to call, I think it's a very valuable component of the insurance is to have that direct line in the event of a claim, to have someone take over and walk you through the whole process.
No, I agree. I mean, we've been involved with several incidents with our clients, and that's typically the way the process works. You can call, I mean, there's three entities that you want to definitely have. One is your insurance, definitely. Another one could be legal counsel as well, just to make sure to determine your exposure, whether it's regulatory or whatever the case may be. And you need to have some representation of technology, whether it's going to be a forensics company, which a lot of times is also recommended by the insurance company as well, just to make sure that the investigation is done right, that they get all the facts as to what happened, and then hopefully you can use that to definitely to prevent it from happening again. But a lot of this also depends on we were talking a little bit about the prevention, but you really should have an incident response plan or some type of process already in place before something happens, and that process should definitely include who to notify first, in the event of a breach. So, as Mike mentioned, we're coming up close on time, but hopefully this has been informative. As far as a takeaway, just make sure, security is a process. So you want to make sure you address different layers within security. You want to make sure that you know who to call in case there is an incident. You have to realize that, you are a target, whether you're going to be targeted, whether you're a low-hanging fruit, a target of opportunity, you will be targeted, and it really doesn't matter the value. If you have no sensitive information, you could become a target as well. And the way you combat this is through awareness, through making sure that you communicate the threat all the way up to senior leadership, so that we can get their buy-in, you can get their understanding of the threats. And also, when you get lost in the terminology, do not be afraid to ask, do not be afraid to look at, as Mike mentioned, if you're going to get insurance, a broker probably makes sense because they could explain the complexity, since cyber insurance has gotten a little bit more complex. When it comes to security, you can definitely use a third-party organization that is going to hopefully walk you through that process, and let you know what where you need to go in order to make yourself a more secure organization. Does anybody, Johnny, do you have any final thoughts?
No, not really. I mean, I suppose to touch on that, to push my own thing, it's like, it's a lot easier to have a team there, for you to be able to monitor this stuff. So, you don't have to think about it. That's what we're here to do. That's what we do, and that's what we prevent on a daily basis. And to us, it's second nature. And, and we're a lot less, expensive than a massive data breach. I'll say that much.
And Michael, how about yourself? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's be aware of that you are a target, and you need to really take a look. A lot of businesses, especially in the publicly traded, there's a lot you have to look at as far as making sure your risks. Look at it as you would any other investment risk. What is the cost? What is the mitigation? What was the risk of like a $6 million cleanup expense, or $200,000 a year or less, $50,000 a year, in cybersecurity services. I mean, that's really the range of things that you need to look at. Now, understand that those prevention measures, like we were talking about, are not 100%. So you need to make sure that those where the risk remains, you have a plan in place to respond. You've got coverage from an insurance carrier. You know who to call. On that, just a little past, the FBI is not who you want to call. They will take it as a crime report, but they won't necessarily help you recover. They just help you help with they're the police in that context. They're not going to come in and help you fix the problem, the underlying problem. They're going to try to see if they can go after the guy who caused it.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining the panel today. I want to thank my panelists here. And if you need more information, obviously for myself, I work for CyZen. You can contact me or look up at our website at cyzen.io. Mike, where can folks go if they want to get additional information?
Sure, thanks, Will. Yeah, Mike Tomasulo with AHT Insurance. You can look us up on our website, www.ahtins.com.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And thank you all of you for joining us for this panel.